Hello, everyone. I believe many of you have already logged in. We will get started in just a couple of minutes. So thank you for your patience. Hello, everybody. Again, welcome to our conference, our virtual conference. We've got a great week for you, and we'll get to some of those details in the coming minutes. What I'd like to do is begin by introducing our amazing superintendent, Dr. Kristen McNeil. It's only through her leadership that we're able to bring this to you today. So, Kristen, it's all yours.
Thank you, Dr. LaMarca, and thank you all for attending. This is our first annual Complex Trauma, Student Learning, and the Trauma Sensitive Conference. You know, we had originally planned this conference for April 2020, and then you all know what happened during that time. So given the pandemic, we know this conference and the sessions are needed now more than ever before. As you all know, too many of our students experience adverse childhood events that can have long-lasting learning and health impacts. Our collective ability to be sensitive to these experiences and provide a safe, welcoming, and nurturing environment should go and can go a long way in helping a child thrive. It's what you all do every single day. We often think our children are resilient, and they most certainly are. And we need to make sure that we support their resiliency in this time. The ideas and practices that we will learn about are especially important for our students that have experienced trauma. However, these practices are good for all of our students. We hope that you and your teams will find that we are not asking for you to do any more at all. Instead, we hope that you are able to see how you can tie the many things that you are already doing within your buildings, relationships with our students and our families, inclusive practices, social and emotional learning and support, and tying those together. We also hope that we will gain some important insight into how to better care for ourselves, as we too are affected both directly and indirectly, and to support our students. We need to be the best for ourselves. It's a big commitment, I know. However, we feel an important commitment as we strive to serve our students to the very best, again, for our collective abilities. So just once again, I truly, truly appreciate, we know how busy this time of year is, but I really want to express just how appreciative we are for you supporting this conference and the work that's to be done. So thank you, and back to you, Paul.
Thank you, Kristen. So it's my kind of privilege to get to run through just a couple of opening comments, and then I will introduce our keynote speaker. I do want to walk through the conference agenda. You probably are very well aware, but just in case people aren't. So tonight we will have from Dr. Jennings our keynote speech, and then we will have a panel with our community partners where we'll discuss how trauma is affecting the community as a whole. Tomorrow afternoon, evening, as well as Wednesday, we'll have our breakout sessions, and I think you've all selected your breakout sessions. And then on Thursday, we will have a panel that will be made up of some of our school leaders as well as some of our other community partners. And we'll talk about how these school community partnerships can benefit students and families. We'll also have some summary comments that day, and then we'll set you off on some school planning time. I do want to say that we are asking principals to sort of lead that school planning time, whether you create a virtual presence or you guys do that in person. But we can talk about that more later. In terms of logistics, you should have unique links to each session. For example, you're on a link right now that enables you to listen to the keynote talk. And then we will take a break and you will get back on, but you'll be using the link for the community panel. Tonight and Thursday, we're using a webinar format, which might be a little bit different for some of you. We will have the question and answers feature turned on, and you're able to put in some questions and comments, but unfortunately, because of our limited time, we're going to answer those after the fact and get all that information to you just as soon as we can. Again, we'll have about a 10 to 15 minute break between Dr. Jennings' talk and the community panel this evening. Tomorrow and Wednesday, we'll be using a typical Zoom format. And again, you should have your links to those sessions that you signed up for. The presenters will lead those presentations and they'll have interactive opportunities for you in each of those. And again, there'll be a 15-minute break between. I do want you to be aware we're recording the sessions, we're recording this. And in terms of the breakouts, we're just going to record the first session. They're all running 4 times. The point of this is to allow you, as well as people that can't attend this week, to access this critical material after the fact. You can earn CEU credits for your participation. Anyone who chooses will earn a half a credit just by logging in and participating these 4 afternoon evenings. If you extend that with 3 hours worth of work at your school site, and we certainly hope you'll do that, you can get a full credit, and we can provide you more information about what you need in order for that to occur. Andrea Kearney has been creating a web presence for us, and so all of our materials, the recordings, the PowerPoint materials, as well as any handouts our presenters may have, will be there for your access after this week. I do want to take a couple of moments to provide some thanks. Again, I want to thank Kristen, Dr. McNeil, our superintendent. She's been a great leader and she's been supportive of this effort. And so thank you, Kristen. I want to say a special thanks to Stephanie Keating, Delisa Crane, and Rochelle Solonia, as well as the entire MTSS SEL staff and our Family School Partnership staff. A lot goes into a conference, even a virtual conference, and they've just been tremendous. I have no idea how to do these things, and they're doing it all. So thank you guys. And I want to say thank you to our presenters, both our internal staff as well as our community partners, and of course, Dr. Jennings. I have to say thank you to Jennifer DeLette Snyder and Join Together Northern Nevada. It is through JTNN that Dr. Jennings is able to join us tonight. And you all may recall that JTNN purchased Dr. Jennings' book for each of the schools last year. And then a special thanks to all of you. As Kristen said, we know how busy you are, and this is a big commitment. And we do think, though, if we all engage, it'll be more than worth your while. So why now? As Kristen said, we thought this was urgent last spring, and really it's been urgent for years. And we had the conference planned, and then COVID hit. And given the pandemic, as well as many of the social injustices we've collectively experienced, including what's happening in Minneapolis today, We do not know what will happen with that verdict, and we do not know how that may create additional trauma, as well as some of our own personal losses, such as the loss of our dear friend Ben Hayes just 4 weeks ago. These things make this an urgent experience for all of us. So again, thank you. We are going to be sharing very sensitive content. It could be triggering for you, so please reach out if you need anything. I find that this content can also at times be threatening, and it can lead to paralysis. Well, what do we do for our students, for our families? Our intent is simply to support you in building your understanding and your capacity to act. We hope that you receive validation for all the efforts that you do every day, and that through this content, you can see how to connect various expectations. This is not intended as another layer of expectation. It's intended to help you put the pieces together and to provide those great learning environments for all of our students, especially our students that have experienced complex trauma. On Saturday, I was on a hike with my dog, and I typically do that. And I had my earphones in, and I was listening to my music, and I was thinking about the conference. And the song Beautiful Boy by John Lennon came on. This is a song that is dear to me because I used to rock my infant boys to sleep every night listening to it and a couple of other songs. And there was a lyric that is in the song that really resonated with me as I thought about this conference. And he sings, "Life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans." We need to give ourselves and each other permission to take care so we're better able to take care of our students and our families. And that is incredibly hard to do, but we need to do that. We need to give ourselves the gift of the present moment. You know, tomorrow's going to come, and so is Wednesday, and so is Thursday, and you're going to have incredibly stressful days, a lot to do. There's going to be several things you don't anticipate. You're going to have to solve those problems, and you're going to be drawn to think about that tonight. And I ask you to give yourself the gift of presence. I think if we do that tonight and each night, then collectively we're going to grow professionally and personally. So thank you and enjoy the conference. And now it's my opportunity to introduce Tish, Dr. Tish Jennings. She is a professor of curriculum instruction and special education. She comes to us from the University of Virginia in the Curry School of Education. She is an expert in the area of trauma-informed practices and has authored multiple books, including The Trauma-Sensitive Classroom, Building Resilience with Compassionate Teaching. Dr. Jennings is a former classroom teacher, and she is a teacher at heart. She was going to be with us last April, and so I am so pleased that you're with us tonight. And so without further ado, I will turn it over to you, Dr. Jennings.
Thank you so much, Paul. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all. I'd like to start by just getting ourselves present together. So one way to do that, to bring ourselves fully here, is to get a sense of your body in space here, wherever you are, whether you're sitting on a chair or maybe on your sofa or somewhere else, wherever you are. Just notice for a moment the weight of your body sitting on the chair. Feel your presence here. And just bring yourself here in this present moment. If you're like me, you've probably had a busy day, a lot going on, your mind on a lot of things. So taking a moment to bring yourself to this present moment. And by doing a couple of deep breaths, filling your body with air and then letting it go. Noticing that sensation of air as it's going in and out of your body. So, welcome. So I'm going to begin by sharing my screen. And I'm also going to begin by giving you a little bit of context from where I am coming and where my expertise in this area comes. I come to you as a teacher, as a former teacher, 22 years in the classroom, school leader also, But I think most importantly, a child that was exposed to trauma myself. And having had that experience myself as a child and having to cope with that and having to live through school with the challenges that come with that helped me understand kids. And it also gave me a passion for helping students because the few times I did get the kind of support I needed in school made a huge difference to my own personal recovery. And so I came to see how important the relationships that students have in school are to that recovery. And I started my career with this deep commitment to helping students like me. That's the reason I became a teacher. So, welcome to my talk. So here's an overview of what I'm going to present. I'm going to talk about survival systems, and then I'm going to talk about stress adaptation, and we'll learn more about what that means. One of the core of my book, The Trauma Sensitive Classroom, goes into these 3 keys to compassionate teaching: cultivating supportive relationships, creating safe spaces, and building on strengths by supporting adaptation. And then I'm going to talk about building resilience with mindful compassion. One thing I want to mention is that everything that I'm going to talk about today is something that you can weave into your existing practice. It's nothing you need to add on. It's really more about an orientation towards what you're doing rather than changing a lot of what you're doing. So it's not like we're asking you to do a whole lot more. It's more about understanding how to do it with greater ease and keeping your heart open, which I know is not easy, but we're going to talk about how to do that. But first, let's talk about the survival systems. So human beings managed to evolve to the place where we are today. If you think about it, sometimes it can kind of stretch your imagination, but these 3 systems helped us get to where we are now and help us survive to this day. The first one is the threat system, which is pretty obvious. The second one is the drive system, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then finally, there's the affiliation system. They're all critical to our survival. The threat system is the system that protects us physically. It's the fight, flight, or freeze response. It's what happens, and it's a biological and psychological process that helps us overcome physical threat, real danger. The drive system, we engage in competition or achievement. It's the part of our survival process that helps us go out and gather food or hunt or do our jobs or whatever it is that we have to do to make a living, to create our society, to create our culture. All of that is part of the drive system. The affiliation system is based in the attachment system. It's the feeling of connection with one another. And it starts with the parent-child bond. It involves this attachment process. It also involves, it can involve soothing and helping us soothe our nervous system. And it also involves compassion, which we're going to be talking more about. This comes from Paul Gilbert, who's done a lot of work using this model in clinical psychology. And we've been, and my colleagues and I have been applying this to the classroom context. So often in our society, there's an overemphasis on the threat system and the drive system. Both those systems are encouraged and reinforced a lot in our culture. And you can see it on a day-to-day basis. And often we use the threat system to motivate the drive system by using coercion. Because our society, and it's not just the schools, sometimes our schools can also reflect what's in society, but it's the society that sometimes emphasizes these over the affiliation system. And in some cases, the affiliation system is seen as something not that important, or maybe it's too fluffy, you know, but really it's critical. It's really critical to our well-being. So one of the things we can think about as we're thinking through how we want to create these environments that are supportive to everyone, including children who have exposure to complex trauma, is by reducing feelings of threat and increasing feelings of affiliation. And how do we do that? So recently, my colleagues and I published a chapter that's coming out soon on how to think about leadership differently. So we can think about leadership as pro-social leadership or coercive leadership. Coercive leadership involves threat of punishment and a drive to compete with one another. Pro-social leadership involves building social connectedness, compassion, and collective efficacy. And one thing I have to say about your district is I already was very well aware of your district before I was invited to come talk to you all. Your district is a model district for the kinds of building of community and understanding the importance of this. And so I think you're very fortunate to have superintendents and the other leaders in your community that understand this, because it helps a lot to it's one of these kinds of processes that involves top-down and bottom-up leadership. So it's not just the superintendent and the other leadership of your district, but it's also your principals and teachers are leaders also of your classrooms. So why do we care about all this? Well, I think it's really important to remember, I'm sure you probably know this, but the prefrontal cortex, this part of our brain, the front, is really important to academic learning. And in schools, we focus on a lot of activities that require the engagement of this prefrontal cortex, like regulating our attention, inhibiting distractions, focusing on the content we're supposed to be paying attention to, the executive functions, the ability to plan, working memory, setting goals, and social decision-making, understanding the consequences of decisions we make on ourselves and others and our relationships among one another. Some of that involves being able to take the perspectives of others, and mentalizing, which is being able to understand what another person might be thinking about. All of this learning takes place in a context. So depending on the context, the way that the brain functions is going to change. And that's really important to understand when we look at complex trauma. We also know that stress can impair the functioning of the prefrontal cortex, and this can interfere with self-regulation and learning. So, and over time, it can even evolve into learning and behavior problems, especially in this learning context that we're talking about. And those students who've been exposed to all kinds of risk factors have a more difficult time sometimes managing the stress and engaging in learning because of the stress. But the good news is that social support, these relationships that we're talking about, really do help people recover from the stress and recover from the trauma. Another thing that's important to recognize that we now know through research is that our own stress as teachers impacts our students. So how we are feeling and how we're dealing with our own stress can make a big difference in our classrooms. So I use the words trauma, chronic stress, and toxic stress interchangeably. Trauma can be a single incident, something that happens, one thing. For example, in my life, there's actually two big things that happened in my life that were incredibly traumatic. My father died suddenly when I was just after I turned 9. And my mother had mental health problems. And when I turned, right before I turned 15, my mother committed suicide, leaving me orphaned. So I had two parents die during my childhood. one by suicide, which is incredibly traumatic. So those are two incidents in my life that were traumatic. However, between the time that my father died and my mother died, my mother's mental health was deteriorating, obviously, and she was also abusing alcohol and other drugs, some prescription drugs. So I was dealing for about 6 years with having to live with a mother whose mental health was in really bad shape. So it was an ongoing adversity. There was also poverty involved. We were also moving a lot, so there was transience involved in all that. And so you can't think about it as just one thing. There's individual differences in how these kinds of experiences impact somebody. So your personality, your health, your age, and other things like poverty and racism and inequity, they compound the effects. And I really like this graphic that shows you how all these play out. If you look at the top part of the tree where the leaves are, those are all what have been identified as ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. I have to say that this research, which I'm going to talk about briefly, is really important, but these don't cover all of the things that could happen to you that might be traumatic. Because if you look at this list of these, depression, emotional and sexual abuse, substance abuse, etc., death of a parent isn't on here. So when I do the ACEs survey myself, 2 of my biggest traumas don't even show up on that list. So it is limited in what it can do, but it has enlightened our understanding of trauma in a huge way. And it's important to recognize that. So just to look at these ACEs, here are the 8 ACEs listed here. And then you can see the prevalence rate. And if you look down at the bottom where the pie chart is, the red is the number of people in the US who have 1 or more ACEs. So it's not that uncommon to have ACEs. The only, there's 42% say they don't have any ACEs, and the balance say they have at least 1 or more. So it is common, it's not uncommon. But the other thing to understand is that these data are adults' retrospective reports on their own childhoods. So in that sense, it's also limited. But the important part of this data is that what we know from lots and lots of research is that the more you've been exposed to trauma as a child, the greater impact it has on your health. And they're starting to figure out why this is. But you can see from this pyramid that it can affect your development early on, which can result in social, emotional, and cognitive impairment, which can also lead to risky behaviors in adulthood and diseases and early death. The scientist the doctor actually, who initiated the first ACEs study back in the late 90s through Kaiser Permanente in the San Francisco Bay Area, he was interested in obesity, and he started realizing that he started seeing a relationship between obesity and trauma. And so he decided to start finding out more about it. And he did find a huge link between trauma and obesity, which is also one of the risk factors that you can see in this pyramid. I think that one of the most important things to understand about trauma is that in the context of the traumatic place, like the home or wherever the trauma is happening or the adversity is happening, children adapt to that in ways that help them cope and survive with that adversity. And these are the ways that they often adapt. Hyperarousal is one way. If you live in a dangerous environment where you're not sure you're safe, being able to be constantly vigilant about what's happening around you will help you survive, because you'll see where the danger is. The problem is when you're hyper aroused, it's very hard to focus your attention on something. So when it might help you at home, but it will not necessarily help you at school. Another one, which was my go-to, is called dissociation. are also sometimes called avoidance. And that is kind of where you see children just shut down. Well, there's different ways this occurs, which is something I've learned over time about myself. As a young child, I would just shut down. I would just be like not there. And the way that can play out is in school. I got, my report card said I was a daydreamer, or sometimes they said she's spaced out. Because the teacher would ask me a question and I wouldn't even know where the class had been or what she'd been talking about. And that was really embarrassing and frightening sometimes too, because I didn't know that that's what was happening. I just knew that I didn't know what they were asking me. So I felt kind of dumb. And teachers actually called me stupid a few times, especially when it came to anything that involved working memory, because it definitely impaired my ability to use my working memory to engage in learning processes. For example, spelling. Really had a hard time with spelling. Math, any kind of math. This all happened, the beginning of this happened in the beginning of 4th grade. And any kind of math that involved remembering a step, like long multiplication, long division, I couldn't do it because I couldn't hold anything in my memory. Another way that this plays out socially is you can be around people and all of a sudden they're laughing and you think they're laughing at you because you don't know why they're laughing. So, and they might be laughing at you because you're kind of not there. So that's the way some of those play out. There are other more invisible ways that can also play out. For me, later, I learned how to just do nose to the grindstone and work on school, which was also a way of dissociating, but it was more adaptive. But it took me until, I don't know, later in my adulthood to realize that I had become a workaholic and I couldn't even stop working because it was a way of separating myself from the pain that I had been living through. It was a protective mechanism. Also, another way that we adapt to trauma is through negative thoughts and beliefs. We reinforce whatever other people are telling us about ourselves. There's also a tendency to re-experience trauma. And that can come in the form of triggers, things that happen that seem familiar or similar in some way, which can be very confusing to teachers because all of a sudden a student might melt down and you don't really understand what's going on. And it's really hard to predict because it doesn't necessarily logically connect at all. It can just be a feeling state that can arise and it can create this either a shutting down or a hyperarousal. This all is also related to insecure attachment. So one of the most important things to do is shift our perspective. And I also know this is not easy, but the shift of the perspective can go from what's wrong with him to what happened to him. And to understand what's wrong with him, we understand that he feels threatened, like in this picture. So when you look at this picture, your first instinct might be, oh, he's mad at me. Oh, he's angry at me. I might feel defensive. I feel upset because he's threatening me. But if I stop and think about what's going on in his life, I realize that he's just dragging along some anger that he has been experiencing at home to school with him. And he may not even realize what he's looking like right now. He is in pain. He is suffering. It doesn't have anything to do with me. It's not personal. And he's not trying to hurt me. He is just really unhappy and really suffering. And so making that shift and remembering that it's not about me. It's not something that it's not directed at me. It's really pain and suffering that needs attention and needs to be seen and heard. So these 3 keys to compassionate teaching that I mentioned, the cultivating supportive relationships, creating safe spaces, and building on strengths by supporting adaptation. I know you're all doing these things now, I'm sure. It may just need to be, you may need some reminders, you may need some extra skills to see how to do this consistently, because I know it's not easy. And what we're going to do is we're going to see how some things might interfere with this and how to overcome those. So starting with cultivating supportive relationships. So one of the ways we survived to this day from, if you think about it, about 70 million, oh, I'm sorry, 70,000 years ago, there were some hominids in Africa that were evolving into humans, and they almost became extinct during that time. And they were moving farther and farther to the coast to this very small group of people. Maybe they're guessing now, maybe 10,000 of us were living there. And somehow or another, through these years, tens of thousands of years, we went from a small community of 10,000 humans to spread all over the whole entire world to where we are today. Building our society, building our culture, building our language. Just think about what we've done. Well, we did that together. We did that as communities. We did that as part of communities because we don't survive by ourselves. We could never have done this as individuals. We have to, everything we do as a community, a group of people. It's a basic human need. And it evolves from this parent-child bond because our infants, when they're born, they cannot survive by themselves. They need adult care for so long compared to other animals. So we had to create these affiliation systems. Otherwise, we wouldn't have survived. Part of this involves feeling seen and accepted for who we are, and given opportunities to make valuable contributions to our community and having those contributions valued. Finally, recognizing and honoring the value of diverse facets of humanity. Today we are facing so many challenges. It's an all hands on deck moment in history. And there's so much variability in human nature that isn't honored and valued. And it's really time to really incorporate all of that, because we need the outliers to come up with some good ideas. And we can't count on sort of the status quo to keep moving the same direction we're moving, because it's not working. So how do we do this? Well, we can help our students build relationships. One really important part of this is modeling respectful behavior. And as I've said, I know that's not always easy because we have our own experience, and sometimes it gets challenging. And being able to regulate ourselves in the midst of all of this is not always easy. But I'm going to give you some tips about that too. Cultivate respectful peer relationships, build relationships with families. And I know you all have a stellar home visiting program that is fantastic. And I encourage you to keep doing that, because that makes a huge difference. And helping students transition to a new program, helping children make that transition if they are new, and giving transient students time to adjust. I think for me, I moved every single year for 5 years, and having to adapt to a new school, having to adapt to new peers, new everything was very, very hard. And I didn't get a lot of help with that. And I think it can make a huge difference to feel welcome, feel like you have a place in this new school. Creating safe spaces. What does that mean? So first of all, I have to say this requires a whole school approach. When we talk about safe spaces, it's not just safe spaces for the children and the adolescents in the environment, but it's the safe spaces for everyone, including all of the adults, not just the teachers, not just the staff or the administration, but the custodial staff, the secretarial staff, everybody who's involved in the school. Is building this sense of community that we're all part of, and promoting physical and psychological safety. Trustworthiness and transparency is important for adults and children. Peer support is really important, and collaboration and mutuality, really understanding that we can do this together and building that feeling of togetherness and collaboration. And finally, empowerment, voice, and choice. And this empowerment, voice, and choice isn't just for the children in the environment. It's also for the adults in the environment. it's hard to feel safe when you don't feel empowered, if you feel like your voice isn't being heard and you don't have choices about how you do what you're going to do. And we always have to take into account the cultural, historical, and gender issues that come to the fray when we're talking about creating safe spaces for everybody, no matter what their background is. So it's a good time to review discipline policies. And I think it's important to understand that giving students the benefit of the doubt and understanding that when they want to behave the way that we're expecting them to, that they do want to behave as how we're expecting them. When they don't, they likely don't have the skills that they need to do that. And so understanding that and recognizing that can give us sort of some grace to step back and see what it is they need to learn. Like, what are the skills that are missing here? And so it's not like letting go of accountability. Accountability is really important, but we have to understand that you can only expect people to be accountable when they know how to be accountable. So proactive approach that involves focus on skill building can make a big difference. Also distinguishing between coercive harsh punishment and reinforcing positive expectations. That when you're a student who's been exposed to trauma, you're often exposed to a lot of harsh coercive punishment. That's part of experiencing the kinds of abuse that we're talking about in a home situation where there's this kind of complex trauma. So whenever a student who already has a resistance to this or experience with this kind of overly harsh punishment, when you start talking about rules and discipline, there's an immediate resistance because there's already fear. There's already immediate trepidation. Because as a child, I feel like I can't behave because no matter what I try to do, this is actually was my experience. No matter what I tried to do, my mother was always mad at me about something. And I would try different ways to make my mother happy, but my mother was, I couldn't make my mother happy. That was obvious, but I didn't know that. I thought that there was something I could do. And so whenever it would be very easy for me to immediately feel like there's something wrong with me, that I can't do this whenever there's punishment involved. But on the other hand, understanding that these expectations are for our own safety, to help me feel safe, that is a whole different ball of wax, because I appreciate guidelines that people agree to that will help me feel safe, because I'll know that that nobody's going to hurt me, and because that's what those expectations are for. So when it's framed like that, it's much less threatening, and that's just a minor little shift, but a really, really important one. So, avoiding any kind of approaches that trigger feelings of powerlessness, fear, and shame. Pointing kids out, naming kids out when they're not paying attention, or pointing kids out in a particular way that embarrasses them will not be helpful at all. And then building on strengths by supporting adaptation. What do I mean by that? So I think it's really important to take strength-based approach. These students who are coming to us that are having trouble adapting to the school environment, they know how to adapt to these other environments that they're living in. They are survivors. Unfortunately, the things that they're learning how to do to survive don't work really well in school. But if you can find the strengths that they do have, if you can find what it is that they can offer us in whatever way it happens to, however it happens to show up, that can be a place to build from. So getting to know your students, getting to know what it is that they have to offer. And it might be surprising. It might be something that doesn't fit into the traditional idea of what a good student is. I'm thinking back to a student I had that really had trouble reading, but he had incredible content knowledge. And when I discovered that about him, his content knowledge, I could use the content knowledge to help him build the skills of reading, because I could engage him in activities that would allow him to communicate about the content knowledge he had, and building off of that helped him learn how to read. So, but you also have to help them become aware of their own strengths and point that out to them, because they may not even realize they have any strengths at all. If they're at all like I was, I felt like a complete failure when I was during those years, like I couldn't do anything right. Even though one of the strengths I did have was in language arts. I was always really good at language arts. And the one teacher who made a huge difference in my life was my creative writing teacher in high school. And she saw that strength and she nurtured it and made a big difference in my life. So finding those strengths and building them can make a big difference. And building instructional programming that boosts these social ties and networks by drawing on children's strengths. So for example, if a teacher knows that a student has some artistic abilities, another student has strong language arts skills, whatever it is, put them together and have them work together on something that allows them to show each other the value they bring to the table. So you might be saying, how do we do this? And I wouldn't blame you, because I know, having been a teacher myself, I know having experts come and tell you that you can do things differently or do more of what you're already doing, whatever, can sound like, too much or unbelievable. So the rest of my talk, I'm going to talk about how we do this. So first, we have to really understand the context that we're working in, and the different context, the context of the classroom, the context of home, really different contexts. We need to build our own resilience. And one of the most important parts of building our own resilience is self-care. It's really important. Also, understanding our emotions and understanding how to work with our own emotions in the context of the classroom is important. And we can also cultivate greater resilience using mindfulness, practicing mindfulness exercises, and also cultivating compassion. So the context. Those of you who are in the classroom, I know we have teachers here and other people working in the classroom. Sometimes it can feel like this. I spent about 15 years in teacher education, supervising student teachers and observing classrooms. And often I would, after I was finished observing, a teacher would say, "Oh, my classroom was a disaster. I'm so sorry." And I felt like they imagined their classroom looked like this. It didn't look like this at all, actually. It looked fine. It might have been a little bit loud, but to me, that wasn't a problem. But it made me realize that this context is very complex. It's very demanding. It's cognitively demanding and emotionally demanding. You have to keep in the front of your mind the content that you're teaching, which is not always easy, especially if you're a new teacher, especially if you're teaching something new. You have to keep track of the time, right? You have to keep your eye on everybody that in your classroom. You have to be tuned in to all the interactions that are going on between the students and you and among one another. And at the same time, you have no privacy. You're in this room together, all of you. You can't leave and you have no privacy. So when anyone in this space gets emotionally annoyed or irritated or hyperactive or whatever is going on, it has a ripple effect on everyone. And it's like being in a pressure cooker in a way. So it requires a very high degree of social emotional competence that it's not the same thing as any other job. In fact, Lee Shulman, who was a professor at Stanford who studied professional development, he once said that the only thing in medicine that compares to teaching is emergency room work. And so we have a big challenge. So we have to understand that we're already coming into an environment where we're at risk of high stress, and we have to work hard to keep the stress level under, keep it down, because it's very easy for people to feel stressed in this environment. The other thing that's important to remember is this stress response that we have, the threat response, it evolved to help us deal with physical threat, like being chased by a lion. It didn't evolve to help us deal with psychological threat. So when we feel threatened and the neurotransmitters and hormones kick in that are involved in this stress response, this threat response, that are intended to help us run really fast or fight or whatever it is that we have to do to survive, a psychological threat, it doesn't help with that at all. In fact, it can interfere with that. So being able to understand that and recognize that in the moment, so that when something happens, like I have 5 more minutes to finish this lesson and my student over here is talking to his friend and not listening, and I'm starting to feel frustrated and my shoulders are feeling tense, and because I'm feeling threatened. I'm threatened that I'm not going to get through my lesson by that behavior. And so in my mind, I might automatically start taking that personally, or think that it's directed at me intentionally, when it's not. It's just they're doing kid stuff, right? But that's easy to have happen. That happens a lot. I have experienced that myself. So it takes this awareness of our emotional state and how it's impacting our perception, so that we can calm down and slow down a little bit, and give ourselves and our students some space. So this resilience, this ability to flourish in the face of adversity, to respond to challenges, to grow and learn and adapt, to change, and to recognize that constant change really is the nature of reality. It's just that we get settled in on things being a certain way, and when they change in ways that we may not like, it can be really hard. So self-care is really important, and it involves physically taking care of ourselves, emotionally caring for ourselves, and also giving ourselves what we need psychologically and spiritually. And I love this quote from Parker Palmer from this book, Let Your Life Speak, Listening for the Voice of Vocation. Self-care is never a selfish act. It's simply good stewardship of the only gift I have, the gift I was put on earth to offer others. Anytime we can listen to true self and give the care it requires, we do it not only for ourselves, but for the many others whose lives we touch. So now we have a moment for a poll. And so I invite you to think a little bit about, how often are you currently practicing self-care? As you're answering this poll, I think about self-care as, it's not just a spa day. Spa days are nice, but it's a lot more than spa day. So we see that most people say several times a week, but there's the 13% who say multiple times a day, and many who say once a day, less than once a week. I want to reflect on that. So one of the gifts that we can give ourselves, and it can be one of the starting places for self-care, is some space. Give ourselves a little bit of space. And I love this quote from Viktor Frankl: between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and freedom. So part of giving ourselves space is accepting how things are now. The realities of COVID, we're living with this uncertainty, and we have been. I mean, we've been living with uncertainty anyway, but now you add the COVID and it just throws a wrench into the already challenging situation we were in before. It's a huge stressor for everybody, and it's especially difficult, I know, for school leaders and teachers and students and all of their families. And we're also facing the realities of a disparity in access to resources that, it just became much, much more evident how much disparity there is in our society. And 6 in 10 adults in a recent study say that they've experienced strong negative emotions this year, including anxiety, depression, loneliness, and hopelessness. And it's important to understand that recovering from this is going to take time. It's not something that's going to change overnight. And I'm so glad that you're taking time now to think about this so that you can be prepared, because I'm already seeing and I'm already hearing around, my local area, but other places, we've got to get the kids to work. We've got to get them back on track. Like there's this, it's this pressure, that's not going to work. It's just not going to work. We need to give ourselves some space. We need to recover. The more pressure we put on ourselves and our students, the more resistance we're going to get, the harder it's going to be to recover. We will recover. We will recover. Have faith that we will. I have seen young children recover very quickly from difficult situations when they're given this opportunity to flourish that we're talking about. So I am very hopeful that we can do it. But I just know that this coercive pressure is absolutely the wrong thing to do right now. It's not going to be good for anybody. And mindfulness can help us. And what is mindfulness? It is a state of mind. It's not, it is something that you can practice, which we're going to learn more about. But it's also a state of mind that people can have at any particular time. And some people are just more naturally mindful than other people. It involves directing attention to the present moment with this attitude of acceptance and curiosity, and also the ability to be with difficult feelings. So here's another poll for you. I'm curious what your experience is with mindfulness. No experience, practiced once or twice, practice occasionally, or practice daily. It's been really amazing to me over the years that I've been doing this now. It's going on close to 20 years, that when I first started, nobody knew what mindfulness was. And now it seems like people are much more familiar with it, and there's many more people practicing it. And we have so much more science behind the practices than we did before. We now know that they're very helpful for building the kind of resilience we're talking about. Wow, 56% of you say practice occasionally. Wow. And 32% practice daily. Wow. Yeah, this is a big change that I have seen over this last period of time, and that also gives me a lot of hope. So I'm going to guide you in a mindful awareness practice right now. So the one I'm going to teach you is called breath awareness practice, because it involves focusing your attention on your breath. And many of you who have practiced have probably done this before. But I also enjoy doing it in the context of a session like this, because when you do it with others, you also get a sense of connectedness with the people that you're with, even if you're on Zoom. I've been doing some teaching like this on Zoom, and it is pretty interesting that you can still feel connected even though you're on a computer. So I invite you to sit up nice and tall so that you can feel the sensation of your breath. When your torso is uplifted and your chest is expanded, it helps you sense that breath going in and out of your body. And you can close your eyes, or if you'd rather, you can just lower your gaze. None of you have your cameras on, so nobody's watching you. I'm going to close my eyes as I guide you. So again, go back to that, the way I started, and notice the weight of your body sitting here, wherever you are on your chair. Just notice that your body is here in this present moment. And begin by taking a few slow, long, deep breaths. Just feeling the air going in, filling your lungs, and then leaving your body. Big, deep breaths. And then allowing the breath to settle into its natural rhythm. And focusing the attention on that sensation of the breath. Feeling the air as it enters the nostrils and fills the windpipe. As the chest rises and the belly rises. And then the air leaves the body on the exhale. Just noticing the feeling of the breath. With openness and curiosity, like you're exploring this sensation of breath. If your mind wanders, it's okay. That's just what the mind does. Just gently notice that your mind has wandered off into a thought or attention on something else, the sound of something. And then gently and kindly bring your attention back to the breath. Just letting everything be as it is right now in this moment. There's nothing we have to do, nothing we have to plan or think about. Just being with our breath, exploring the feeling, the sensation of the breath. And in a moment, we're going to end this practice. I know it was a short practice, but it's just a taste, a chance to connect in this other kind of space. So when you're ready, you can open your eyes. And I invite you to reflect on these questions, just something to think about on your own. How was that? Were you able to focus your attention on your breath? Did you notice when you became distracted? And did the experience change over time? And if so, how? Sometimes just taking a break like that, a short mindful break, can make a really big difference in how you're feeling. It can help you become more aware of what's going on in your mind. It can also help you become more aware of your other things going on in your body, tension, and it can help you work to shift the approach or the feelings that you're having and work with them better. I'm going to be telling you a little bit about the research I've done around this in a minute, but the one practice that we've found with teachers that has worked, everybody says they love and works really well, is taking those deep breaths. And when we started asking teachers which of the practices we'd taught them did they find most useful and why, it was this 3 breaths, just taking 3 breaths. And they also said, the tricky part is knowing when I need to take the breath, recognizing that. And mindfulness can help us in a lot of different ways because it can help us tune into how we're feeling, what we're thinking, and create some space between the thoughts that we're having and what we want to do. Because sometimes those thoughts get in the way of what our real intentions are. It can help us see that. Another part of becoming resilient is understanding our emotions. And emotions go along with these survival systems because they go hand in hand with them. They're adaptive functions that engage these biological, cognitive, and behavioral processes that help us survive. There's 2 different kinds of emotions. Often some are called negative emotions, but I don't like to use that word. That's why I use parentheses. Or quotes, sorry. Unpleasant or uncomfortable is a preferred way I like to talk about them, or positive, pleasant or comfortable emotions. The unpleasant emotions are often associated with the threat system. They trigger the stress response like anger, fear. They narrow our focus because if we're threatened, we have one priority, and that's survival. And so we're focused on whatever we need to focus on to survive. It reinforces negative perceptions with thoughts. So if I'm really in danger, telling myself over and over and over again something's really bad or something's really dangerous is going to help me because it's going to keep my stress level elevated until I'm safe. So I might be telling myself over and over again, this is a dangerous situation, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, because it's keeping my stress level elevated. But you can see under conditions where you're not really physically threatened, that's problematic. That turns into rumination, which doesn't help. And this is one way that mindfulness can help us because it can make us aware of that's what's happening. And it can help us go, wait a minute, I'm not really threatened here. Yeah, I'm not going to get my lesson done, but that's not the end of the world. I'm not really physically in danger. And it involves this sort of limited conditioned reactivity. It's an automatic reaction to something that it's like a programmed reaction to situations that we can start noticing also. The positive or comfortable emotions do the exact opposite. They're also really important to our survival, but they build our resources. They build our relationships. They build our resilience. They broaden our focus. They help us see the whole context. They help us see the bigger picture. They help us they give us awareness of other people's perspectives. And they also help us be more creative and have creative responses to situations. So understanding this about emotions and using this understanding intentionally to promote the well-being in our classroom can really help a lot. One of the things we need to understand about human beings is we have something called a negativity bias. To help us survive, we tend to look at things, we highlight danger, we highlight threat because it helped us survive. But we have to understand that our minds do that so that we don't end up being stuck in that negativity space. And how can we do that? Well, one way we can do that is by intentionally cultivating and savoring positive feelings. And we can do that in our classrooms by noticing when they're happening, pointing them out, and identifying them and giving them labels. And this happens all the time. I mean, the next time you're doing something really fun with a group of kids, pointing out, wow, isn't this fun? Look at, we're smiling. Isn't this fun? What does that feel like to be having so much fun? You know, like really tune in and then savor. What does that feel like? Doesn't that feel really good? What do you notice about it? Does it make you feel warm? Does it feel sort of warm and fuzzy maybe? You know, identifying that and really getting into it can make a big difference, because the positive emotions can undo the negative effects of negative emotions, so that when the stress response is all, you know, kicked in, doing something to shift the emotional tone into something more positive. That's the reason why sort of the humor at the right moment can make all the difference in the world. It can just release the tension. So savoring these moments of love and joy and inspiration, gratitude, awe, and other positive emotional states, we build resilience for ourselves, but we also build it in our community as well. So take a moment and you might, if you have a piece of paper in front of you, if you're taking notes, you could just jot down some things, just sort of do a brainstorm. Think about some things you're grateful for and just write down a few things. What am I grateful for? And as you're writing all these wonderful things that you feel grateful for, you know, I'm grateful for the fact that I can work on Zoom. I'm grateful for having a wonderful community that I work with, that I have a good job, that I have pets and a good partner, my family, my health, lots of things to be grateful for. So as I'm feeling grateful, as you're feeling grateful, notice what that feels like. What does gratitude feel like in your body? Bring some mindful awareness to the sensation of gratitude. Oh, what does that feel like? Savor it. You know, Bob Emmons, who was on my dissertation committee at UC Davis, did a really interesting study back, I don't know, in the 90s sometime, where he randomly assigned people to two groups. One group wrote down every day 3 things they were grateful for. He called it counting blessings. And the other group just wrote down 3 things that happened, but not anything that had to do with gratitude at all. And he found that group that did the blessings improved in their psychological improvements were amazing. And I remember when this study came out, people were amazed at just how powerful cultivating gratitude is. And this is an example of how we can bring more awareness to our emotional states intentionally and cultivate them as a community that will build our resilience together. We can also work with our students and teach them simple practices, like something we call calming and focusing. This is a picture of some work that we were doing in Charlottesville, the community I live in, to teach kids to calm down and pay attention. The calming, yeah, we tell our students all the time, calm down and pay attention, but we don't often teach them how to do that. The calming is just the simple 3 breaths like we've done earlier. The focusing can involve focusing attention on something sensory, like listening to the sound of a chime, listening to sounds in nature. Focusing attention in ways that involve the senses is easier for younger children because the kinds of things we do as adults, it's a little bit more advanced and abstract for them. Also, doing things physical like yoga or postures that involve balance or movement can also be really helpful for our students as well. And so we can empower ourselves by building our internal capacity to recover and thrive, and recognize our mindsets and our dispositions and cultivate agency, resilience, creativity, and persistence. And we can also work together to build collective efficacy. This is the #1 influential factor in promoting student achievement. When we feel efficacious together as a community, it can make a big difference, better, more different, a bigger difference than any of these other factors. And we do this by connecting with our community, forming groups of stakeholders with a common cause, and then value and honor the group's achievement. And we can help by cultivating compassion, by being aware of other people's suffering, engaging in empathy and cognitive and emotional, generating feelings of care for others, and cultivating motivation to help one another. So how do we know it's going to work? So I'm going to finish up here by giving you a brief overview of my research on a program called CARE that I helped develop that involves these elements: self-care, these emotional awareness skills that I talked about, mindfulness, and empathy and compassion practices, and applications of these to teaching and learning. And in a sample of 224 teachers in 32 elementary schools in New York City, we did a big study, and we looked at the teachers, we looked at the classrooms, and we looked at the students to see if this program for the teachers, it's totally involved, focused on supporting the teachers, would be able to have these downstream impacts on their students. And what we showed was that the teachers who had the CARE program were improved in emotion regulation, mindfulness, and they reduced psychological distress and something called time urgency, which I'm starting to feel right now because I'm almost out of time. And we had long-term effects on emotion regulation, mindfulness, and psychological distress. So what we showed was when the adults in the classroom have these skills, we showed downstream effects on the classroom. It was more emotionally positive, and the teachers were more sensitive to the needs of their students, and the kids were more productive. We also showed student improvements. Across the board, students were more engaged, and students with low social skills, who you might identify, they might have been trauma exposed, we weren't sure, they improved in reading competence and motivation. So the research we have is showing us that this can be done. The thing I have to point out about my research is that it was done at the individual teacher level. We are now doing a big study at the school level where we're randomizing schools. One group of all the schools are doing a social emotional learning program, and half of them are being randomly assigned to also get CARE, to see at the school level if that can make a difference. Because I really think this is not something individual teachers are responsible for. It's the whole community needs to work together to support our students this way. And if you want to learn more about what's in the CARE program, my book, Mindfulness for Teachers, has a lot of the content that's in that program if you're interested. Many of you have the trauma-informed classroom, but there's also these other books that are available too, including the Teacher Burnout Turnaround book that just came out recently. So I thank you for your time. It's been such a pleasure to be with you. I hope next time I can see you all in person and be there in Reno with you as the sun sets here in Charlottesville, Virginia. Thank you, Paul. It's been such a pleasure to work with you all.
Thank you so much, Tish. I'm clapping for everyone at this point. Well, actually, Kristen just joined me. So thank you for being here. Everyone that's on the session, remember, we are now going to take a break. We're going to start on time at 5:15. So you should have a separate link that will get you to the community forum. If you have any questions and you weren't able to put those into the question answer feature, please do not hesitate to email me and we will respond to you as soon as we can. So again, Dr. Jennings, thank you for your time. And we do want to see you as well. So when we have our second and third annual, or whenever we can, we're going to bring you here in person.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, bye. Everyone, sorry. I'm going to sign off. Bye.